Hey Tim, good
Hey, how you
morning.
doing?
Yeah, good, thanks. Sorry for just calling you out the blue, but given your expertise about wolves, and yeah, I've been seeing all this stuff about Colossal. It's all over my, all over my Blue Sky feed on Insta, and this idea of, yeah, what they're saying about dire wolves coming back. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, Colossal's a company I think it was valued at something like 8 million pounds earlier in the year in January. 8 billion, sorry, 8 billion. And it got a lot of investment, believe it or not, from Hollywood when they came out from. And what their plan was, what they kind of their aim was to do what's called de-extinction. So that's bringing animals back from the dead. And I have to admit, I kind of thought when I heard about it, I thought what the sort of thing they were planning on doing is every now and again you'll find actually quite well preserved animals like mammoths that have died and have been frozen in permafrost, and then they come up to the surface, as it melts or just kind of by the movement of soil. And sometimes you even hear about like wolves, modern day wolves, stumbling across an old mammoth and eating them. They're so well preserved, so you can get DNA out of them, and you can do some pretty good deep sequencing, deep read sequencing. So I always thought their aim had been to try and put together a genome of mammoths and then put it into something like an elephant egg and then gestate that in an elephant. That
Yeah.
was always going to be hard because still the DNA would have fractured. We talked to those Oxford nanopore
Yes.
people, and getting the long reads would be hard. But I thought that was kind of one of the things they're aiming to do. But what they've kind of announced today is a little bit, or yesterday is a little bit different. So do you want me to go and kind of talk you through that?
Yeah, because it's your area of expertise, and as a chemist, I'm a bit lost with it all. So yeah, thank you.
So what they've been able to do is they have been able to get some, do sequencing of remains of dire wolves. So dire wolves were a species that separated from modern day wolves, grey wolves, about 8 million years ago, 6 to 8 million years ago, something like that. And they evolved from a type of dog. So they're not particularly closely related to wolves, but they were a little bit larger and they looked similar. So it's a case of convergent evolution where evolution's kind of produced two things that look pretty similar.
Yeah.
And a lot of canid species, so a lot of dog species, and I think Gregor talked about this on the domestication podcast, they'll actually hybridize with one another. And so what the idea is that if you were able to take some genes from a direwolf and splice them into a dog, with any luck, the resulting embryos would be viable and would survive. And so what Colossal have done is they have been
Those
able
would,
to get,
sorry,
sorry.
those would have the characteristics of then both both
That
the parents, and that would be passed on to the offspring, right?
Yeah, that's exactly the hope. I mean, we need to see how selection would operate on that novel genetic variation. So what they've done is they've been able to get a handful of genes, a small number of genes that were in direwolves, but weren't found, or genetic variants that weren't found in grey wolves, and they've been able to splice them in. And they're sort of looking at skull morphology and coat color. These are the things they've been playing with. And so they've been able to do that, and it's quite clever technology, really, to be able to take a gene from an extinct animal and to be able to put it into the genome of a living animal, the grey wolf, and then so it's genetic engineering in that sense, and
Yeah.
then to be able to produce an offspring. And there's I think three pups that have been born and survived. They're being kept somewhere secret in the US. The photos have been released, but what's I think and so the that's quite a clever thing to have done. They've brought some extinct genes back. Whether they should do it or not is another question, and we'll
I mean,
talk to
have
people.
they not watched Jurassic Park? I mean,
Well, it's kind of exactly. But of course, we do genetic engineering of plants and bacteria. And so, normally, with just taking a gene from one organism and putting it into
yeah,
another, what's novel here is they're taking a gene from an extinct organism and put it into a living one. And these animals do have some characteristics of direwolf. So they deliberately targeted genes, and this is the clever bit, genes that they've worked out how they will influence the way the organism develops.
Yeah.
So they've done that, and these things do look a little bit like direwolves, but they're not direwolves. I mean, they're clearly not direwolves. They're grey wolves that have been modified to look a little bit like direwolves looked.
Yeah, so basically genetically they're almost completely grey wolf, and then they have a few genes in them from direwolves. And I guess that then sort of in a way opens up the question of at what point, what's the crossover point? At what point is it how much of direwolf genes would it have to incorporate for us to then say that now that's more direwolf than grey wolf?
Well, presumably you need to find out all of those places in the
Yeah,
genome where there are differences, because
yeah,
obviously they'll share a lot of their genome. And then to have it more of those variable loci, you probably need 50% direwolf ones or more to be able to say it's more direwolf than grey wolf. And actually one of the people that we'll try and talk to some people next week who've got some expertise on that, and we'll see if we can find someone who kind of who's been working in this area. But I think the argument, so I think there's what's happened and kind of what's all over social media at the moment is one, it's a remarkable thing that they've done. There's
yeah.
no doubt about that. Two, they're overselling it to my mind. They're not direwolves. They're clearly not direwolves. They're grey wolves that look a little bit like direwolves. The question is, do they sort of fulfill the ecological function that direwolves filled? So perhaps they're a little bit better. Perhaps they would be a little bit better at killing large animals like bison than, say, grey wolves are, or something along those lines. So you're creating something that might have an ecological function, and is that something we should be doing, or not? The other side of the argument is they're making freaks of nature, and I suppose I think we know how to do it. And one of these you'll see this quote from Jurassic Park that's going around. It's like, you were too focused on can we do it rather than should we do it. I think that was Jeff Goldblum's character. And I don't think that discussion has necessarily happened yet. So it's a really interesting breakthrough. And hopefully we'll try and get some people on next week and we'll do a deeper dive.
Great, thanks, Tim. That's really helped actually. Yeah, and as always, nice to hear from you and to get some yeah, I really do struggle with the sort of bigger biology, so thank you.
Well, what would be interesting is to know what the proteins are and what they look like,
Yeah.
and how they fold. All of the science stuff that we kind of talk about is kind of linked, which is kind of fun, isn't it?
Yeah, we're beginning to link all the bits all from molecules all the way to organisms and then to ecology. It's
Yeah.
really exciting.
Cool. Well, have a good day. I better get
Yeah,
back to
you too, mate.
work, and nice to see you, and we'll
Right.
talk soon.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.